I may not have shown it much or really hinted at this side of me in my previous videos, but growing up I loved things like video games, movies and TV shows, and which early 2000s kid wasn't into these things? Growing up in the Balkan mountain villages, I had the privilege of being in a much more financially stable household, and unlike other kids, I learned to fluently speak and understand English by binge watching Jacksepticeye videos every day after school.
Out you bitch!
With both of these factors in mind, I managed to gain access to completely new horizons and interests. While every other kid would be getting dirty, climbing trees, or playing football, I mostly just sat inside, reading comic books, playing video games, and watching stuff. Media in general had a pretty big impact on me growing up. I don't think it really needs to be said again, and to this day I enjoy these activities and no doubt that they shaped me into the man I am today. But the last couple of years the media landscape has been experiencing something, a sort of shift and change in general culture that 10-year-old me could never think of. I am of course referring to, and may God have mercy on my soul for uttering it, wokeness. Wokeness in media has been extensively documented and critiqued across the entire internet. You have a lot of figures and personalities who stand as the bulwark against this new threat creeping in. Many channels are dedicated to and promote anti-SJW talking points, much more so than in the years back, and I am glad that the tide is more and more shifting against DEI. I'd say that people who enjoy media have most definitely contributed to the cracks in the pillars wokeness in our favorite video games, TV shows and movies is resting on. And I myself have been more or less a spectator in this side of the culture war, perhaps making a comment or two about it and that is it. But today I want to try and set my foot in the ring. My channel has always mainly been concerned with history and politics, but media analysis has never been something I attempted. So I guess let's see how this will go for me. So what do I plan on bringing to the table here? Everyone already knows that wokeness is bad. Believe it or not. You have famous slogans like "I don't want politics in my video games" and "Go woke, go broke." These things have been smashed into our noggins and they are not necessarily wrong. But everyone says "Go woke, go broke," but few people ask, why woke, go broke? What exactly leads to woke media failing in the first place? Is it because gamers don't want certain narratives pushed? Does politics and media in general suck? Does woke equal including trans and non-binary characters? Maybe it is a combination of all of that, but I don't think it is the reason and the source of why these things fail. Rather, they are all symptoms of a much greater problem. Wokeness by itself does not inherently fail. There is a bigger picture here that I would like to explore a little. And let's start this little thing off with a history of how art, politics and culture have always interacted. But first, I want to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Fume. Breaking a bad habit is tough, especially when you're surrounded by people who haven't. One minute you're doing great, and the next you're right back in the same pattern. But here's the thing, it's not always about stopping something cold. Sometimes it's about replacing it with something better. That's where Fume comes in, the leader in the flavored air space. Fume is a flavored air device, not a vape, not an e-cig. There's no vapor, no nicotine, and no batteries, just clean natural flavors like my favorite, crisp mint. It gives you something to reach for, something to satisfy that hand-to-mouth habit, but without the chemicals or the guilt. And beyond the flavor, it's designed with intention. It feels solid in your hand with a sleek wooden build and fidget-friendly magnets and clicks. That adjustable airflow dial? Yeah, it's surprisingly calming, just one of those little things you end up loving. You can use it anywhere, it costs a fraction of what other habits do, and it actually helps you build better routines without pressure. If that sounds like something you've been looking for, go to tryfume.com/Lavader, use code LAVADER, and when you grab the journey pack, you'll get a free Fume topper to go with it. Or scan the QR code on screen. It might just be the shift you didn't know you needed. And thank you to Fume for sponsoring this video. Unlike a lot of leftists who like to espouse the idea, heh, all art is political chud, the more correct statement would be that while art isn't always inherently political, these two have always had a tight relationship with one another, and every political ideology or philosophy has been expressed through art. Take liberalism for example. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries, liberal ideas like individual freedom, democracy, and rationalism were starting to shake up the old world, and you can see this shift in the art of that time. Think of Neoclassicism, those clean lines, heroic poses, ancient Roman aesthetics. It wasn't just about looking good, it was about sending a message. The Enlightenment thinkers and liberal revolutionaries loved this stuff because it symbolized order, reason, and the rebirth of civic virtue. Art was being used to legitimize new political orders. It was visual propaganda for a new worldview. Now, if we jump ahead a bit to the rise of socialism, especially in the early 20th century, you start seeing art morph into something way more direct and in your face. Soviet propaganda art is the most obvious example. Bright reds, big strong workers, hammers, sickles, and all that stuff. The constructivist style came out of this, minimalistic, geometric, bold. It was all about function and message over beauty. To socialists, and especially the Bolsheviks, art wasn't just decoration, it was a weapon, a tool to uplift the working class and completely flip the script on the old elite. Posters weren't just posters, they were battle cries. And it wasn't just Russia, you saw similar stuff in leftist movements around the world. Murals in Latin America, for example, did the same thing, glorifying the worker, critiquing capitalism, painting a future that belonged to the people. Supposedly. Then there's traditionalism, the kind that reacts hard against modernity and tries to cling to the good old days. You can see this especially in stuff like Romanticism, which came right after the Enlightenment. Artists started going back to nature, religion, myth, the rural life. While liberals were painting figures in togas, romantics were painting knights, peasants, and majestic mountains. Later on, this aesthetic got used by more right-wing and nationalist ideologies too. Fascists, for example, leaned into Futurism. Even though it started off as a rebellious art movement obsessed with speed, machines, and violence, it ended up syncing well with Mussolini's vision. The chaotic, energetic style helped push this idea of a powerful modern Italy breaking from the past. It wasn't about beauty, it was about force and momentum. And that is how we got this glorious futurist piece of art of spinning head Mussolini. Yes, that is an actual thing and I absolutely love it. The point I am trying to make here is that every ideology found its voice in art. Whether it was to inspire, manipulate, or just visualize a new world, art was never just art. It's always been part of the struggle. There's a very specific reason why art has always played this role. Wrapping ideas inside emotion, visuals, and stories hits people way harder than just throwing facts or lectures at them. You can try explaining your ideology in a 10-page essay, or you can paint a powerful image or make a movie that makes people feel it without even realizing. That emotional, irrational edge is where art really wins. Psychologically, we're just wired that way. The human brain doesn't naturally respond to dry logic. It responds to stories, symbols, colors, faces, and music. These things go past the rational filter and into the emotional core. When someone sees a painting or watches a scene in a movie that hits home emotionally, their brain lights up in a way that a textbook or manifesto simply can't match. That's why propaganda uses art. That's why ideologies need aesthetics. It's not about truth, it's about impact. I have a whole video on this exact topic on why conservatives need to embrace a more idealistic and utopian approach. I highly recommend you to check it out. But there is one man who really solidified this whole thing and turned it into a weapon any ideology can utilize to not just win power politically, but reshape society and culture as a whole. Many of you already know him. Good old Italian communist Antonio Gramsci and his theory of cultural hegemony. Gramsci asked himself one simple question: How does the proletariat become class conscious? How exactly can you convince and plant these ideological and class ideas into the everyday working man's head without waiting for him to first approach you with interest? This is where his theory of cultural hegemony comes in. Basically, controlling the state isn't enough. You can have the political power, the guns, the economy, but if the culture isn't on your side, people will still think and act like they're under the old system. They may still obey the state and play along, sure, but to actually convince them and make them active supporters is another thing. So instead of waiting around for the working class to magically wake up one day and start reading theory, he figured you had to approach them first, but not with lectures or debates like a Jehovah's Witness missionary at your doorstep. No, with stories, music, language, media, religion, and traditions. What Gramsci argued was that if you want to win, regardless of what ideology you belong to, you have to embed your ideas into the normal everyday stuff. Don't make it feel like you're preaching, make it feel natural. Slip it into movies, make it part of education, let it show up in songs, cartoons, news, fashion. Slowly but surely, people start repeating your values without even realizing they've been taught them. And that's the trick. Make them believe they came to these conclusions themselves. You're not just changing opinions, you're changing the common sense of a society. It's not about forcing people to obey, it's about building a culture where your ideas feel like the default. You don't sell socialism like you sell a product. You make it part of the air people breathe. That was his main criticism with the Bolsheviks in Russia. They took power way too early. Russia was not as highly industrialized as other European nations and thus was not ready for a stage where socialism could flourish. The everyday Moscow worker probably never heard of Marx, let alone the tens of millions of peasants in the countryside. So what did that lead to? Massacres and starvations. The only way the Bolsheviks could realistically hold on to power. But at the end of the day, the average Soviet man still obeyed, but he will probably never be a true communist. In Gramsci's eyes, the very first step is to reshape the culture, and the rest will follow, not the other way around. Quoting the man directly here, "Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph first by capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society." And I think a lot of you have already figured it out. Gramsci is one of the ideological fathers of cultural Marxism. No matter what you believe or think about cultural Marxism and Gramsci, one thing is for certain. He was right. If you seek to change the consciousness and mentality of a society or people, you do that exactly by targeting the general culture. And that is exactly what wokeness is trying to achieve by trying to meddle in our circuses. I don't think it takes a lot of brain power to figure that out. So the big question is this: if we all kinda agree that culture is a battleground for ideas, then why does woke media seem to fail so hard? Why do people keep saying we don't want politics in our games, or stop shoving agendas down our throats? Is it really just because there's an agenda there at all? Is the simple act of including an ideological message enough to make people roll their eyes and switch off? Honestly, that explanation doesn't hold up. Because, as I already laid out, art has always been used for political purposes. People have been pushing ideas through stories since forever. And let's not forget, some of the most beloved, critically acclaimed, and commercially successful games of all time have had massive ideological cores baked into them. Bioshock, the Metal Gear series, Call of Duty, and don't get me started on all the movies and TV shows. I am not gonna go too much into this since this is a topic that has already been discussed. I would recommend the video from the Act Man where he goes much deeper into this and does a much better job than I ever could. Point being, people don't hate politics in the media, they hate bad writing about politics. It's not a question of whether something has an agenda or ideological layer to it. It all comes down to how the writers integrate that message into the story itself. There's a good and bad way of doing this though. Just because your story has politics or a message doesn't mean it's gonna land well. In fact, if you're too on the nose about it, if your writing is clumsy or preachy, it's almost guaranteed to fall flat. And that brings us to what I'd call the golden rule in storytelling, and honestly business in general. Don't make the customer feel like they're being sold something. You want them to feel like they made a decision on their own, like they discovered the idea themselves. That applies to media too. People don't want to feel like they're being preached at. They want to be engaged, challenged, even provoked, but not condescended to. The best stories plant ideas like seeds and let you water them. Again, take Bioshock. That game has a very clear ideological critique. Objectivism, individualism, the whole man chooses slave obeys dilemma. But what makes it work isn't just the message, it's how the message is delivered. The story doesn't stop to give you a lecture. It throws you into a broken world and lets you piece together what happened. Through audio logs, level design, character dialogue, it lets you come to the conclusion that this vision of a quote-unquote free society completely failed. And that impact hits way harder because you weren't just told it, you lived it. And that is how we got this magnificent quote that, in the end, sums up entirely what went wrong in this society.
These sad saps. They come to Rapture thinking they're gonna be captains of industry. But they all forget that somebody's gotta scrub the toilets.
Same with the Metal Gear Solid series. Kojima loads those games with anti-war, anti-imperialist, and anti-nuclear messaging, but he doesn't beat you over the head with it. You get it through the complex characters, the twisted history, the way each mission escalates into a reflection on real-world conflicts. You can play through most of the series and not even notice the politics on your first run. But they're there, waiting for the player to dig in. That's what good writing does. It respects the intelligence of its audience. It trusts that you can connect the dots yourself. That's not easy to pull off, by the way. Crafting a story that can entertain and push a message without feeling forced takes real skill. But when done right, when the writers actually care about the world they're building and don't just want to deliver a lecture or use the characters as simple mouthpieces, it doesn't really matter what side of the political aisle the message is, left, right, center. If it's woven into the story with care and intention, people will listen. They might even be persuaded. And the best part? They'll think it was their idea all along. Meanwhile, modern media has such subtle politics and messaging like,
thanks to Tosh.
That's why we recruited her.
Actually, Tosh uses them for themselves now.
They asked us to let folks know, so now you do.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you for telling me. That's why we recruited them.
yeah, absolutely no wonder people feel like these ideas are being stuffed down their throats and they abhor it. They beat you over the head with a point harder than Negan did Abraham and Glenn in The Walking Dead.
Back to it.
The way I see it, there are two possible explanations as to why woke media sucks and none of the messages resonate with the consumers like they should. The first one is very straightforward. They are genuinely stupid. You've probably heard that old metaphor about the frog and the boiling water. Basically, if you toss a frog into boiling water, it'll immediately freak out and jump out. But if you put it in lukewarm water and slowly raise the temperature, it won't notice the gradual change and will eventually boil to death. Morbid, yeah, but it makes a point. Cultural change works kind of the same way. You don't radically shift society's values overnight with one flashy movie or a single brave character in a TV show. That's not how people work. You have to ease them into it, let things settle in, simmer, normalize, bit by bit. That's how real, lasting change happens. Slow, consistent exposure over decades. Gay rights are the perfect example. It didn't go from gays bad to Pride Month on every corporate logo in one jump. That whole process took decades, even generations. First, it was subtle representation, a background character here, a comedic relief there. Then it moved into more serious portrayals, more central and more sympathetic. Over time, gay characters went from being a rare exception to a normal part of the story, and the audience got used to it. The water warmed slowly. And once the culture had adjusted, things like gay marriage, pride parades, and open support became far more accepted, even celebrated. Look at the history of LGBTQ laws in the United Kingdom. In 1950, homosexual acts between men were criminal offenses. Then homosexuality was decriminalized in 1967, but it only applied to private consensual acts. And then in 2005, same-sex couples gained legal recognition and many of the same rights as married heterosexual couples. Followed up 2 years later in 2007, which made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation in areas like goods, services, education, and employment. And now jump to 2021, they have gained a lot of legal immunities and protections like hate crime and hate speech laws expanded to cover them. This is what I am talking about, the whole path from being illegal to the status of a protected minority with significant immunity did not happen overnight, and there were always gaps in between to shift the cultural landscape on this topic. But what we're seeing today, this isn't slow boiling anymore. This is the frog jumping out of the damn pot. The writers and producers behind a lot of modern media looked at their quote-unquote progress made in the last 10 years and went, cool, we're done now. Time to throw in 47 genders, 3 non-binary leads, and a lecture about privilege before the game even hits the start menu. No build-up, no pacing, just a cannonball dive into the deep end. It's jarring, not because the ideas themselves are bad, but because the delivery is so abrupt and arrogant. 15 years ago, gay characters were becoming more prominent in games and movies. Most people were fine with that. Hell, some even praised it, because it was finally being done with nuance. But then in less than a decade, we leapt from subtle inclusivity to an entire buffet of identity politics shoved into every corner of entertainment. It feels unnatural, forced, and the audience, who wasn't eased into it the same way, immediately recoils. Textbook example of whiplash. So yeah, at the end of the day, the writers are genuinely stupid, not because they believe in equality or inclusion or any of that, but because they don't understand how change works. They forgot that if you're trying to shift culture, you need patience, you need to be clever, strategic. Instead, they're doing it like a bull in a china shop, smashing all subtlety and wondering why people are annoyed. They didn't let the water heat slowly, they cranked the stove to the max and acted surprised when the frog jumped. But the second explanation, in my opinion, makes a lot more sense. They never cared about changing people's minds and giving all these groups representation. These people always hide behind virtue signaling and moral fagging like, oh, what is wrong with social justice? What do you have against us? We are fighting to end hate and promote equality, and other talking points like that. But here is my question. How do you measure injustice? And if you are unsure about that, then how can you tell if you have succeeded? Like, if a certain percentage of women are in leading positions, misogyny will cease to exist. Or if black people represent a certain or equal percentage of prisoners, then racism will be ended. I don't think that's necessarily bad, but what really sets these people apart from other activists is that they believe fighting injustice with injustice. Like firing people from their jobs because of something they said 10 years ago. During the whole Hogwarts Legacy debacle, streamers were sent death threats for even entertaining the idea of playing the game because J.K. Rowling wasn't fond of trans people, and she wasn't even involved in the development of the game. Kim Belair, the co-founder of the infamous narrative development studio Sweet Baby Inc., which is responsible for the majority of these agendas pushed in modern video games, spoke at a famous conference on how to quote-unquote encourage marketing teams to adopt their views and approaches to social justice, maybe telling them that they would get an increase in sales, that they would be praised for taking these bold steps for representation. Nope, she said this.
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher-ups. And if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want.
These are the kinds of approaches you take when you want to destroy and beat an enemy, driving them from your territory or conquering a new area, but not when you are seeking new converts and want to genuinely bring people over to your side like they claim they want. And the reason is simple, they never sought new converts in the first place. Even when you say you are sorry for something, bawling your eyes out at their feet, they will take more pleasure in that than you switching over to their side. Look back at the Hogwarts Legacy boycott drama. Resident Twitch jester Hassan Piker planned on streaming the game, but he would also have a fundraiser on the stream which would go to trans people or something. He streams, people donate, and that money goes to the trans community. So here we had a clear and good way to test out what is truly most important to them. And what did the woke crowd do? They sent him death threats and he never played it, meaning not a single cent went towards the trans community.
Everybody was like, don't play it, don't do it, don't fucking, don't play it and fundraise or a trans lifeline by playing that game. Okay, I won't. It's too much of a headache.
If they truly cared about trans people, and if they truly did this entire Hogwarts Legacy boycott in order to stand up for them, they would have let this livestream air. Hell, even give it a thumbs up in support. But no, they chose to harass and bully and virtue signal about how they own the transphobes, all the while that money Hassan was willing to give could have genuinely helped many people in the community they claimed they were fighting for. What a Freudian slip, ladies and gentlemen. What a Freudian slip. And this isn't just limited to video games, but the big screen as well. There have been quite a few actors and actresses who have shown a clear disdain for the source material, or just in general give answers that could quote-unquote own the chuds. Like Rachel Zegler, who played Snow White in the critically acclaimed Snow White remake. In an interview, she openly said that Snow White would be made for a more modern audience, and then goes on to say that the original is a product of the 1930s. The sing-alongs were weird, and she was happy the whole love part between her and the prince would be left out, but instead focus on quote-unquote Snow White's inner journey to find herself. Please wake up. Or the dumpster fire that was Ridley Scott's Napoleon. That movie was so horrible in terms of not just historical accuracy, but the portrayal of Napoleon compared to actual historical sources. And when Ridley Scott heard all this, he told all the people, unironically, to shut the fuck up. Now, when people who walk into this movie expecting an honest historical portrayal of the Emperor, they're gonna walk away thinking he was a cucked man-child instead of the brilliant general and leader that he was. There is a very noticeable rise in the number of people who work on these things having a clear disdain either for history or the source material they are working with. From the very beginning, their mission was never awareness, never inclusion, never justice. They don't care about black people, trans people, non-binaries, or any of the groups they claim to defend. These identities are just shields, useful tools to wield like weapons while they wage their culture war. What they do care about is destruction. Their joy comes from breaking things other people love. Games, movies, books, none of it has to be good, meaningful, or successful. It just has to serve the purpose of quote-unquote owning le chuds. That's why Hogwarts Legacy wasn't just a boycott, it was a mask slipping. They never wanted to build a better world, they just want to watch yours burn, and they do it all while preaching kindness, justice, and inclusion. In the end, woke media fails not because of its messages or even the identity of the characters it tries to highlight, but because it's built on hollow ground. There's no passion behind the stories, no love for the characters, no care for the worlds being crafted. These aren't creators, these are ideologues wearing the skins of artists. You can tell when someone pours their soul into a piece of work, when they breathe life into it because they genuinely believe in what they are saying, no matter what politics they subscribe to. But what we're getting now isn't that. It's content built out of resentment, performative husks designed to scold rather than inspire, to manipulate rather than imagine, and audiences feel that. They know when something's made with heart and when it's made with spite. This was never about representation, never about justice. It was about power. It was about control, about taking something beloved and twisting it into a weapon, a tool for social leverage, a moral bludgeon if you could call it that. These people don't want to tell stories, they want to win morality and good boy points. But fortunately, the tide is turning. You can feel it. People are not afraid to call this out anymore. They're not falling for the guilt traps or the PR spin. Studios are starting to notice the drop in numbers, the backlash, the fan outcry. Not because they suddenly care, but because money talks louder than their virtue signaling and threats. Sooner or later, they'll have to reckon with the fact that these activists aren't the assets that will make them more money. They're liabilities, parasites that attach themselves to creative work, drain it of life, and leave only a hollow, preachy corpse behind. And that's why they need to be pushed back for stories to genuinely get a chance to thrive again. So let them scream, throw tantrums, and let them be ignored. I frankly could not care less if diversity hires and preachers are picking breadcrumbs from the floor. If anything, I kinda find it funny.